Billionaire activist Tom Steyer is officially running for president. This week, he became the 25th Democrat vying for the nomination after initially saying that he would not run.
Steyer is known for being an environmentalist, and he's vowed to spend $100 million of his own money on his campaign. And Tom Steyer joins us now at the table to talk all about this.
Welcome back.
Welcome
back.
So the last time you were here with us, you were talking about your campaign to get the president impeached. Now it's your campaign to become the president. The first question everyone wants to know is what happened? In January, you said you weren't going to run. Now, a few months later, you changed your mind.
In January, I said I wasn't going to run then because I felt like it was my duty to the 6 million people who'd signed our need to impeach petition to push that forward. At this point, I think we've won that argument. I think everybody in D.C. recognizes at this point that this president is the most corrupt in history, that he's unfit for the office, and that he's a danger to the Constitution and the American people. I'm going to continue to fund need to impeach, but I've watched over the last 6.5 months, we've been pushing really hard for televised hearings so the American people could see what's going on and their voice could be the most important voice in this conversation. We've had one televised hearing, which was Michael Cohen. Mm-hmm. I've also at the same time been watching this campaign roll out. And to me, the biggest question in front of Americans is not who has the best plan, whose nuances on health or the Green New Deal are the most thoughtful. The real question is how are we going to get any of those plans? We have a broken government. We have a government that's been corrupted by corporate cash. And the question is, how do we return power to the people on all the issues? Because on virtually every issue, Washington is stuck in the mud. So the real question is not what, but how.
So, Mr. Steyer, fellow 2020 candidate Bernie Sanders, he responded to your announcement, and he says he likes you, but he says, and I'm going to quote him here, he says, "I'm a bit tired of seeing billionaires trying to buy political power." What's your response?
I don't think it's about money, and I don't think it's about me. I think there's a very specific question in front of everybody who wants to be president, and that's this. What is your vision for the American people about what we need to do? And do they care? And
right,
that's something money can't buy.
Right, but what Senator Sanders is saying is that if I had a specific vision for the country, I wouldn't be able to just jump willy-nilly into the race. I don't have $1 billion. You have a lot of money. You've been a very successful businessman. So that gives you the opportunity that eludes a lot of other people who might have the same ideas.
It has a negative impact on democracy because you essentially are able to sort of buy your way into this conversation.
Well, I have for the last 10 years been doing exactly what I'm doing now, which is actually to try and push power down and get the American people's voice to be heard. Look, in this race, and Senator's a perfect example, I'm an outsider. I've been doing it from the outside for 10 years successfully. If you look at the top 3 polling people, between them they have 70 years in the Congress or the Senate. The question here is if we're actually going to make this change, is it going to come from outside Washington, D.C., or is Washington, D.C. going to somehow reform itself? My argument is I've been doing it from the outside, successfully taking on the corporations and going around failed government. That's what I propose to do now, and that's what we're talking about.
Critics will say you may be sort of a political outsider, but you have for a long time been a business insider. You made a lot of money off of fossil fuels, even though, you're an environmentalist. But there's a sense that there's a little bit of a hypocrisy here with your involvement, that, you make all this money off of fossil fuels as an example, but then talk about regulation and environmentalism.
Well, look, I ran an investment firm for a long time. We invested in every single thing, including fossil fuels. And as part of that process, I came to understand that there was something deeply wrong, starting really with fossil fuels, which is why I divested myself from it and became a climate activist over 10 years ago. And in fact, have been fighting the oil companies ever since. Because like everyone else in America, I was part of the fossil fuel economy. Listen, virtually everybody who's watching, and you guys, has been in a car recently that filled up at a pump. We have to change this society and get it away from what's the dramatic threat to us, which is climate change. That is a process that I'm trying to move as fast as possible, but it's one that all of America has to choose to make, and we have to choose to make that together in a dramatic and emergency fashion.
There's another sort of theme, I think, in the point that Senator Sanders is making, which is there was another outsider candidate who had lots of money, who said, forget all the folks in Washington, that swamp needs to be drained. pick me, that person is Donald Trump. And I wonder if when you look at the current environment, the current political environment that we're in right now, and people say, look, we've got a billionaire who ran for president. Part of the reason that you want to impeach this president is because you think he sullies the office of the presidency, among other things, as to what you've said. So how do you address that criticism that, look, we already have a billionaire in the office and it's not working out for some people who don't like President Trump?
But I think President Trump actually makes my point, which is that 8 out of 10 Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, think that this government has been purchased by corporations. And his promise, the thing that resonated with him, the thing that still resonates with him, regardless of how incompetent and corrupt he is that people think he will bust the system. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly why he got elected, was because people have this profound sense that the government is broken, that it's been purchased, and it doesn't either respect or respond to the people. Of, by, and for the people is gone right now. And the question is, how do we return it? And that's what Mr. Trump, I think all of his decisions have been terrible, literally almost every single one. But the reason he resonated is because all of those 16 other very qualified insider Republicans, people looked at and said, no, you've been doing this for decades and it hasn't worked and it's not working now. It's time to really shake things up, and that's what I'm saying too.
So let's get you on the record in terms of some of the issues that voters really sort of care about. I'm going to start with immigration, both undocumented immigrants, but also the immigration system that both parties agree needs to be fixed. What would you do?
Look, I think we need to separate it. The first thing I'd say about immigration is this. We need to separate it into the 11 million people who've been here and part of society for a long time and get comprehensive immigration reform to put them on a path to citizenship. We keep confusing the people who are coming with the people who've been here for a long time.
So even if you've been here and you're undocumented or illegal, as people say, they need a pathway to citizenship.
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, we need to get past that. And then we need to ask ourselves, what is our responsibility? What do we want in terms of immigration? It's as if we're this passive thing with no intention. We need immigrants. For this society to flourish, we need new people to come. Mm-hmm. And we have never asked ourselves, what are we looking for? Not who wants to come, but who do we want to encourage to come? How do we make our society stronger? And then we have to ask ourselves, what is our responsibility to the people who are just showing up? We've never, it's really funny because in a lot of politics, you never hear people take a step back and say, why do we have this huge defense budget? What is the point? What are we trying to accomplish? And I'd say the exact same thing in immigration. It's at least 2 gigantic questions, neither of which is being addressed. If you want to see failed government, look at immigration. With every single question is a tactical, short-term question run for political reasons, as opposed to having any kind of idea of what we're trying to accomplish over the long term. I mean, it really is a failed system. And for us not to have had comprehensive immigration reform for decades shows how broken Washington really is.
Mm-hmm.
You've obviously, no doubt, seen that this field of candidates running for the presidency is the most diverse in history in terms of, gender, and we have a gay man running, we have people of color. What would you, and even as we've made great strides in 2019, African Americans still lag in a number of ways, whether it's in education, whether it's in job growth, whether it's in wages. What's your approach to garnering the African American vote, given that a lot of African Americans say the system as it is hasn't worked for us?
So what you're saying is that African Americans are saying exactly what I've been saying, which is the system is broken and is responding to something different, to corporate needs, as opposed to our needs and the needs of the people. So I think first thing to say about race is we have to address it straightforwardly and verbally all the time. You can't look at inequality in America without dealing with race and ethnicity openly and throughout the question. Because as you say, you can look at the results and see they're absolutely unfair. And I think that it's a systemic approach, including, of course, education, but also including the idea that there has been injustice for centuries that we need to redress, and we have to deal with it openly and overtly and talk about it so that people can get a completely different understanding of what's happened and the contributions and leadership that the African American community.
Are you talking about reparations?
Well, that was a question that I was asked earlier today by your
Esteemed
coworkers, colleagues, yes. And I was saying, look, there's no question that there has been injustice. There is no question that we should be addressing it. And the only question is, which is yours, let's have the conversation in public about what's happened, and let's have a conversation in public about the best way to deal with that and undo the injustice.
So would you, for example, do you support the Black Lives Matter movement? Do you support
Yes.
do you support the legalization of marijuana?
Of course.
You do?
I'm from California. Good grief, you guys. It's legal in California. I'm not a pot smoker, but that's one of those things where you can look at it and say, the entire Reagan just say no to pot, that wasn't working.
Yeah. Well, a lot of also people have argued that, this is what's led to the explosion in prison populations, and that is severe.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Look, we criminalized something and then enforced the law differentially by race, so that the same drug offenses in the African American community were treated differently and much more severely. And so when you look at the explosion since 1980 of the prison population, it's absolutely focused. I mean, it was an absolute attempt to incarcerate African Americans at a historic, unprecedented, crazy rate with terrible results for those people, those communities, and our country.
You become president. What's your first executive order?
I have that answer, but we're going to roll it out in a little while. I'm not going to.
Okay, then let me ask you something else.
It's not a secret, but let me give us a chance to talk about certain things in order.
Okay, then let me ask you about healthcare. Right, this president campaigned on repeal and replace, but it turned out to be not so easy. And now we're in sort of this no man's land where we really don't know what the end product is going to look like. But he's managed to dismantle some components of the
He doesn't have an end product. Let's be reasonable. This guy does not have a plan.
What would you do?
Look,
what would you like to see?
Let me make 2 points about healthcare. And I'm going to answer your question, but the first point I want to make is this.
Because, many people, though the Affordable Care Act worked for many people, there were some things wrong. It was incredibly expensive for a lot of people.
Look, what we're seeing, the healthcare crisis is really a healthcare cost crisis and a healthcare availability crisis. That's really what's hitting America. And so let's start with the idea that healthcare is a right, and there should be a government option for every single person in this society. Should be much cheaper because it is everywhere else in the world. It's half as expensive. And I believe that the government option should drive down prices and should make the private healthcare systems obsolete over time. But let me also point out, this is my point about this election. People are talking about the nuances of healthcare policy, none of which is going to happen. The question is, how are we actually going to break the stranglehold that corporations have? Healthcare corporations, drug companies, the big HMOs, how are we going to break that stranglehold? Because otherwise, it's an interesting question, and we should go off to some university and have the debate, but it's not going to happen. And the real question here is, how are any of those policies going to get done? Because right now, they're just a nice theory with magical thinking about how it's going to happen.
Like single payer, that's like leprechaun stuff?
Look, in order to get it done, go look and see what it will actually take. My point here is, unless we return power to the people and break this stranglehold of the corporations, it's not going to happen.
Let me ask you, before we let you go, foreign policy-wise, this president has made significant inroads with North Korea. He has brought that dictator to the bargaining table. You disagree? Would you not continue that same level of diplomacy?
Look, I think what Mr. Trump has done in foreign policy, if you step back for 1 second, is he has tried to do all bilateral negotiations on a personal basis, and he's withdrawn us from multiple multilateral, boy, that is a tongue twister, treaties. That, to my mind, that is the most unrealistic way of thinking about the 21st century. What we have is a world where every problem goes across borders, where the ability to solve them involves having partners and trust and organization around the world. And his whole America first, America alone, I'll deal with the dictators of the world by having shrimp cocktails and shaking hands is so stupid that it almost beggars description. What he is doing in foreign policy is so darn dumb and so darn self-centered that it's crazy. And North Korea is a perfect example. What we really should be doing is addressing these things with our traditional allies in a multilateral way, because that's the world we're in. We cannot draw a wall around the United States and think that that's the world. That's a ridiculous and really incompetent idea that the president has.
When are you going to be hitting the trail? When will we see you knocking on doors?
tomorrow.
Where are you going? Where are you
Where are you
going?
headed?
South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. One last question. You spent a lot of money on the midterms. If you do not get the nomination for the presidency, will you throw all of your money, all of your effort, all of your power behind who the eventual nominee is? Will you endorse that candidate?
Yeah, the first short answer is yes. I'm continuing to fund all of the operations we've done, which are basically grassroots turnouts. So when you say in the midterms, what we did was we did the largest youth voter mobilization, the largest turnout of people under 35 in American history, in the swing districts in the House of Representatives. We are going to continue to do. I'm talking about pushing power to the people, grassroots. We're not going to stop one thing we're doing. Look, this is a generational change election. We've got to make sure not that we win, but that we have a sweeping, crushing win to make the point that the power has gone from the corporations coming back to people. If we don't do that, all of the stuff that we're talking about, all these, all the nuances of policy, which are important, but they're not going to happen. And that's what has to happen.
But we're wishing you luck in your campaign to win the presidency. But if you don't get the nomination, will you support the
100%.
100%.
I'm a Democrat. I've done it for 10 years more. I've done it, virtually my entire life. I'm not going to stop now. This can't be about me. This has to be about a crushing victory.
All right.
Tom Steyer, thank you very
Thank
much for stopping
you.
by.
Nice to see you guys.
Nice to see you too.